3 men attacked a CEO in the schoolyard, but a single dad janitor with a mop changed everything. If you're going to mop the concrete, at least look like you mean it. The voice cut through the late afternoon air like a careless flick of a switchblade. Casual sharp, meant to sting. Griffin Ward didn't look up. He didn't flinch. He just kept pushing the heavy industrial broom across the sidewalk outside Westbrook Preparatory. His steps steady, his grip firm. The boy who'd made the comment 16, overconfident, wearing loafers too clean for real walking, snorted and walked off, flipping his designer backpack over one shoulder. Griffin's only acknowledgement was a slight pivot of the broom, sweeping a thin arc of dry leaves into the already full dustpan. Quiet, efficient, invisible. That was how he liked it. Westbrook, the kind of school where parents arrived in imported SUVs and donated libraries to ensure college admissions had no idea who Griffin really was. To them, he was a background character, janitor, groundskeeper, handyman, a shadow among marble columns and ivy-covered walls. He preferred it that way, but shadows notice things, patterns, breaths that come too fast, postures that don't match the script. And just now, something shifted. Griffin paused for the briefest of seconds, feeling it, before he saw it, the dissonance of movement in the crowd of parents gathering for pickup. He straightened slowly, hands still on the broom handle, and watched. 2 men, mid-30s anonymous, in a way that took effort, moved through the lot like wolves dressed as sheep. One carried a folded newspaper too deliberately. The other wore sunglasses, though the sun had already dipped behind the gym. They weren't talking, they weren't smiling, and their eyes didn't scan for children. They scanned for timing. Griffin's jaw clenched, his breath slowed. Sloane Hart exited her car precisely on time, as she always did. Griffin had seen her from a distance a dozen times before sharp heels, darker suits, posture like she'd been carved from marble. She walked with intention, never lingered, and didn't wave unless necessary. Today, she had her phone in one hand and keys in the other. Her daughter, Ava, was already running toward her. That's when the 3rd man stepped out from behind the bronze statue of the school's founder. The air changed. Griffin didn't think. He moved. He was 30 yards away, yet his boots hit the pavement. With a rhythm born of training most would never understand. The broom never left his hands. The 1st man reached for Sloane, fast and hard, arm already outstretched. Griffin closed the distance like thunder. The broom's handle connected with the attacker's forearm, wood and bone, colliding with a crack. That silenced the air. Before the man could cry out, Griffin rotated reversed grip and drove the opposite end of the broom into his solar plexus. The man folded like cheap luggage. The 2nd attacker reacted too slow. Griffin pivoted, sweeping the man's legs with the flat of the broom, catching him mid-lunge. The man crashed onto the asphalt head, bouncing off the curb with a sickening thud. The 3rd pulled something from his jacket, a blade. Griffin hurled the broom. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't rehearsed. It was instinct and muscle memory sharpened by years and buried beneath blue-collar silence. The broom struck the man's hand. The knife clattered to the ground. Griffin followed, driving his shoulder into the man's midsection and dragging him down hard. Then quiet, utter quiet. Ava clung to her mother. Sloane stood frozen, eyes wide, her breath caught halfway to panic. The entire pickup crowd stared. Phones had begun recording halfway through the 2nd takedown. One child whispered, "Whoa!" Griffin rose slowly, scanning the lot. No other threats. The attackers groaned on the ground, unable to move. He looked down at his hands, calloused, steady, empty. The broom lay splintered at his feet. Sloane found her voice first. How did you? Are you hurt?" Griffin asked, his voice low, quiet but firm. She shook her head. "No, my daughter. She's okay." "I think good." He glanced around. "Get her inside. Police should be here in 2 minutes. Let them handle the rest." Wait, what's your name? But Griffin was already walking away, retrieving the broken halves of the broom and placing them carefully in the maintenance cart. He could feel the eyes on him, the disbelief. No applause, no thanks, just a janitor with a broken broom and blood on his boots. Later, inside the headham's office, 2 security guards hovered awkwardly near the wall. The attackers had been taken, away in cuffs. The footage was already being uploaded. Local news vans were circling like vultures. Griffin sat across from Headmaster Ellison, who rubbed his temples as if dealing with a migraine that had outstayed its welcome. "I'm going to be blunt," Ellison said, leaning forward. "You used force." "I stopped a kidnapping," Griffin replied evenly. "You used a weapon." "That broom? It was a broom. That broom broke someone's arm." Griffin didn't blink. Then he should have picked a better target. Ellison exhaled. "Griffin, this is a school. We have policies, procedures, liability. You acted outside your role." Griffin stood. "My role was to mop the sidewalk. I was doing that until 3 men came after a mother and child." Ellison hesitated. "The board will review, but unofficially I'd prepare for termination." Griffin nodded once, not surprised, not angry, just tired. Before he left the office, Ellison added, "By the way, what you did, my wife says you look like Jason Bourne with a janitor's badge. Even the kids are calling. You the Broom Reaper online?" Griffin didn't smile. "I've been called worse." That night, back in his modest apartment, Griffin knelt beside his daughter Luca's bed. She was already asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling in the rhythm of safety. He fought hard to protect. On the nightstand, a drawing she'd left him. Stick figures, one tall, one small. The tall one held a broom like a sword. The words scrolled underneath said, "My dad protects people, even when no one sees him." Griffin closed his eyes. He didn't want to be seen. He just wanted to be left alone. But fate apparently had other plans. The applause had faded. The headlines cooled. And now came the reckoning. Griffin Ward sat in a silent, windowless room on the 2nd floor of Westbrook Prep, the same school where just 3 days ago he'd stopped a kidnapping with nothing but a broom, a steady hand, and reflexes no one expected a janitor to possess. Across the conference table sat 5 board members in suits that looked more expensive than his rent. Their smiles were paper-thin. The headmaster, Mr. Ellison, dabbed at his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief. A legal advisor whispered something into his ear before nodding toward Griffin. "We'd like to thank you for your swift action," Ellison began, voice overly measured, "and we are relieved that no one was seriously hurt." Griffin said nothing, but Ellison continued, fingers nervously tapping his water bottle cap. "The board has reviewed the incident thoroughly, and while your intentions may have been noble, your response bypassed every emergency protocol we have in place." Another board member, a woman in pearls, leaned forward. There were armed response, officers on their way. "Had you simply alerted security?" "There wasn't time," Griffin said quietly. She flinched just slightly, be that as it may, acting unilaterally and with force created liability concerns for the institution. Griffin exhaled long and low like a man tired of teaching the same lesson to people who never listened. "And what's the liability?" he asked, voice calm on letting her get taken. The room chilled. No one answered. The vote was unanimous. Griffin Ward was to be placed on administrative leave effective immediately. The phrasing was polite, bureaucratic, designed to avoid lawsuits or social media backlash, but everyone in that room knew what it meant. "You're a hero," Ellison mumbled as Griffin stood up, "but this is a school, and we need peace, not headlines." Griffin didn't even blink. Outside the school, a line of kids were still whispering about Brooman, their voices full of awe. Some held up their phones, hoping to catch another glimpse. But when they saw a Griffin walking toward the staff exit with a cardboard box in hand, their voices fell silent. At the end of the sidewalk stood a little girl with a backpack nearly as big as her Luca Griffin's daughter. She ran to him, smile wide. "Daddy, guess what? Ms. Kessler told the whole class you saved a real CEO." Griffin knelt to her level, brushing a curl behind her ear. "I saw your video. You were so fast. You looked like Batman." He smiled, soft and tired. "Batman doesn't mop floors, but you do." She beamed proud. "And you still saved her, so you're better." He kissed her forehead. "Let's get home, superstar." But as they walked to the car, she glanced up. "Why did Mr. Ellison say you're not coming back?" Griffin stopped, closed his eyes. "Did you do something bad?" "No," he said simply. "I did something right, and it scared the wrong people." She held his hand tighter. That night, their apartment felt colder. Griffin warmed leftover soup while Luca colored at the kitchen table. A drawing sat in front of her two stick figures holding hands. One wore a cape made of mop strings. "I told Molly, your job is way cooler than her dad's," she said. "Her dad's a pilot." "Exactly. He only flies people places. You save them." Griffin sat across from her, watching the way her little fingers pressed crayon to paper with conviction. She believed it. All of it. And that's what hurt the most. The truth was, he hadn't meant to be a hero. He just hadn't been able to stand still. Not again. Not when someone was screaming and he could still move. But now bills would pile up. Luca's. School tuition was overdue. The apartment lease would expire in 2 months. And he had just walked away from the first steady paycheck in years. Doing the right thing had cost him everything again. And yet when he looked at her at that drawing, that smile, he felt something. Strange. Peace. The next morning, Sloane Hart stood alone in her glass office, rewatching the footage that had gone viral. It wasn't the takedown she kept watching. It was the 3 seconds after. The way Griffin gently moved her daughter behind him with one hand, never taking his eyes off the final attacker. The way he didn't check if anyone was watching. He just acted. Her assistant stepped in tentative. The board at Westbrook voted to terminate his contract. "It's official." Sloane didn't respond. They said it was a procedural issue, liability mostly. She closed the laptop with a soft snap. Sometimes, she said, procedure is the coward's word for paralysis. "Ma'am, never mind. Call legal. I want to find out where he lives." Downstairs, Griffin wiped down the kitchen counter for the 3rd time. Not because it was dirty, but because it kept his hands busy while the storm in his chest raged quiet and slow. Luca came out in pajamas, sleepy-eyed. "Dad?" He turned. "Yeah, baby." She held up her drawing, the same one from the night before, but now there was something new. A golden door behind the caped figure open with light pouring out. "What's that?" he asked. "That's you," she said. "You're not just a janitor. You're the one who opens doors, even the ones no one sees." Griffin swallowed hard. "That's a big job," she shrugged. "Then I guess you need a bigger broom." And for the first time in days, he laughed. Outside, headlights flashed in the alley, and behind them the sound of heels on concrete. The knock was polite, not timid, not aggressive, just deliberate. Griffin opened the door slowly, expecting a neighbor, or maybe the building manager reminding him again about rent. What he didn't expect was her. Sloane Hart stood in his dim hallway like she didn't belong anywhere yet, somehow commanded the space entirely. No entourage, no security, just her in a camo-colored coat, black slacks, and eyes that didn't flinch. Ms. Hart Griffin blinked. She gave a half smile. "You mop floors quieter than most people breathe, but I still figured this was your place. Did they send you?" he asked flatly. "Board of Education HR. Someone else who wants to thank me before kicking me out of something." "No," she said. "I'm here on my own." Griffin didn't step aside, but he didn't close the door either. "May I come in?" she asked, gaze steady. He hesitated, then moved. Just enough. Inside, the apartment was clean, modest. A bookshelf with worn classics, a coat rack holding only his jacket, and a small pink one with unicorn buttons. On the wall, a faded photo of a younger Griffin in military uniform. Sloane's eyes caught that, but she didn't ask. "You want coffee?" he offered. "Sure." They sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, steam rising from mismatched mugs. Luca was still asleep in the next room. The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable, just full of things neither quite knew how to say. "You lost your job because of me," she finally said. Griffin sipped his coffee. "Not your fault, isn't it?" "Nope. I didn't get fired for saving you. I got fired for not playing by their rules." She looked at him carefully. "Do you regret it?" Griffin's jaw tightened. "They had my daughter's name on a list, her class, her schedule. Someone made sure I knew that before I acted. So, no, I don't regret a damn thing. That hit her harder than—" She expected, her fingers curled around the ceramic mug, anchoring herself. "I looked into you," she said quietly. "I figured Marine, 4 tours, honorable discharge, then nothing. You just vanished." "I didn't vanish. I just stopped showing up in the places people expect to find men like me." "Why, janitorial work?" He met her eyes. "Because it lets me be invisible, and invisible keeps my daughter safe." Sloane exhaled long, and low, then reached into her coat and pulled out a small envelope, placing it gently on the table between them. Griffin didn't touch it. "What is that? A job offer?" He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Doing what security?" "No," she said. "Something better. I want you on my personal team. Internal operations, staff, oversight, quiet, but essential. I need someone who sees everything and knows when to speak." He stared at her. "You don't even know me. I know what kind of man moves toward danger when everyone else freezes. I know what kind of man checks on the scared kid first, not the headlines." Griffin's brow furrowed. "Why are you really here?" Sloane didn't blink. "Because I'm tired of being surrounded by people who only protect my reputation. I want someone who protects what matters." He looked down at the envelope again. Still didn't touch it. "I can't be bought." "I know," she said. "That's why you're worth hiring." Later that night, after she left, Griffin stood at the window watching. The city pulse quietly under the street lamps. Luca leaned against him, her head just under his ribs. "Was that the lady from the video?" she asked. "Yeah." "Is she a good guy or a bad guy?" Griffin didn't answer right away. "She's figuring it out," he said finally. Luca nodded like that made perfect sense. The next morning, he showed up at Hartwell and Comey headquarters in the same worn jacket, clean boots, and a fresh uniform shirt. Security stopped him, of course, until Sloane herself came down and waved him through. "You're early," she said, eyes narrowing with the ghost of a smile. "You said it was a real job," Griffin replied. "Real jobs start before the day does." She led him through a maze of hallways, sleek glass, steel, and sunlight. The building pulsed. With quiet power, people moved with purpose. Every word mattered. Except as they passed a group of junior executives near the elevator, he heard it. "Is that the janitor guy?" "No way. She actually hired him." "What's he going to do?" "Sweep away the SEC." They chuckled, unaware. Their voices carried. Griffin kept walking. Sloane stopped, turned. "Gentlemen," she said coolly, "you're laughing at a man who's done more with a broom than most of you could with a Harvard degree and a loaded Glock." Silence. She looked at Griffin. "Let's go." The office she gave him wasn't grand, but it was private, clean, and came with access credentials that made Griffin pause. "You're trusting me with a lot," he said. Sloane looked him dead in the eye. "I don't trust easily, but when I do, it's absolute." Then she handed him a sealed folder. He opened it. Photos, security footage, surveillance reports, all pointing to something much darker than he'd imagined. "This is why I needed you," she said, voice low. "What is this?" "Something's happening inside my company. Quiet, calculated, and whoever's behind it. They were willing to hurt my daughter to send a message." Griffin's fingers tensed around the edge of the file. "You're not just here to clean up," she said. "You're here to find out." Griffin nodded once. "I don't like snakes," he murmured. "But I know how to make them show their teeth. I've seen war zones with clearer front lines," Griffin muttered under his breath. The glass walls around him gleamed like armor, spotless, sterile, deceptive. From his modest corner office on the 23rd floor, he had a full view of Hartwell Biotech's open concept hive. Desks like command stations, voices low and urgent, polished, shoes clicking across Italian marble like synchronized drills. But beneath the polish, he could already feel at the tension that didn't show up on quarterly reports. The glance held too long, the smile that didn't reach the eyes, the way people paused when they thought they weren't being watched. He didn't need to understand finance to know when something was rotting. A quiet knock pulled him from the glass. It was a woman in her mid-40s, efficient, sharp-eyed, neat bun. She wore a navy sheath dress and a badge that read Helen Kersey, Executive Admin. "Ms. Hart asked me to show you how things work around here," she said, voice clipped but not cold. "And to make sure you don't get lost in the glass." Her words, not mine. Griffin stood. "Appreciate it." They walked the halls together, not like a tour, more like a chess game. Helen didn't waste words. Third-floor compliance and legal never linger. They don't like shadows. 7th, research and innovation. Soundproof for a reason. No one really knows what goes on there, and those who do aren't talking. And the 10th, marketing. They smiled too much. Griffin cracked a grin. Noted. They reached the executive floor, 35th, where the air itself felt thinner. Helen motioned toward a glass-walled boardroom with blinds that could turn opaque at the press of a button. "Meetings here aren't meetings, they're performances." Griffin leaned slightly toward the door. Inside, he saw Sloan flanked by board members, and her COO Trent Malden, a man with movie star features. Hair too perfect, smile too precise. The kind of smile Griffin didn't trust. Helen followed his gaze. "That one's charming until he decides you're in the way." "Tell me something I don't know," Griffin said. Helen paused. He was the one who hired the school's private security contractor last fall. Griffin's face hardened, and he was the one who quietly signed off on cost-cutting measures, including off-site student record storage, she added. The dots connected fast. Too fast. "Someone sent those records to me," Griffin murmured. Helen didn't blink. "Then you understand why Ms. Hart needs eyes that don't blink." That afternoon, Griffin walked the building like he belonged there because no one questioned the man who looked like he knew what he was doing. He lingered near coffee rooms, elevators, coffee nooks, watched who waited for who didn't make eye contact, who changed conversation mid-sentence when someone entered the room. A man cleaning up coffee stains is invisible, but a man pretending to be cleaning, that man hears everything. 2 junior analysts were whispering outside the HR suite. "Did you hear what happened to the temp from 3 weeks ago? The one who flagged that payroll glitch?" "She's gone." "No warning. Clean exit. NDA signed in blood, probably. Trend got everyone spooked, even the old guards watching their backs." Griffin's hand stilled over his notepad. No need to write. It was already burned into memory. Later, near the elevators, he saw Trent Malden again, flanked by 2 VPs, laughing too loud. The kind of laugh people perform. But then Trent's eyes found Griffin. He didn't flinch, just held the gaze. A beat too long. Trent's smile didn't falter, but something shifted behind the eyes. Then he leaned in toward his men and said something too low to hear, but Griffin didn't need to. He knew the tone. Who is that? Find out. Back in his office, Griffin opened the sealed drawer Sloan had authorized. Inside a tablet preloaded with limited access files, encrypted logs, and one live stream, the camera outside her daughter's new school. It wasn't surveillance. It was a message. She's still a target. The implication read, and Griffin, he wasn't just an employee. He was a line drawn in glass. He keyed in a note. Internal behavior patterns consistent with preemptive damage control. Malden likely orchestrating shadow ops under guise of cost management. Begin phase 1. Listen, map, observe. He paused, then typed one more line. Someone inside still thinks she's alone. Time to remind them she's not. That night, Griffin walked Luca home from the after-school program. Her hand was in his. The city was buzzing with life taxis honking neon, blinking through early dusk. She skipped beside him, humming a tune she made up on the spot. "Daddy," she said suddenly. "Your new job? Is it scary?" Griffin thought for a second. "It's like being the only one awake in a dream where something's about to go wrong." "That sounds scary," she said. "It is, but it means I get to turn the lights on before anyone else trips." Luca smiled like a hallway nightlight. He laughed. Exactly like that. Back in the Hartwell Tower, 3 floors above Griffin's quiet office, Trent Malden poured himself a drink in his private suite. He stared at a still image frozen on his monitor. Griffin in the elevator, unblinking, steady. Malden raised an eyebrow. "Let's see what you're really here for, janitor." The kitchen in Sloane's penthouse was all marble and silence. Griffin stood, near the sink, rinsing out a chipped mug with one hand, while the other absent-mindedly rested on the granite counter. It was nearly midnight. The girls had been asleep for hours, and the humming stillness of the apartment made the city's noise feel like a distant storm behind glass. Sloane entered quietly barefoot, wearing a hoodie much too large for her, probably borrowed from her daughter's closet. Her hair was loose, something rare. She paused when she saw him. "I didn't expect you'd still be here," she said, reaching for the kettle. "I was just making tea," Griffin replied, holding up the mug. "Didn't mean to invade your space." She gave a small shrug. "It's not invaded if it finally feels human." They moved around each other with the awkward grace of 2 people who'd been through wars, but not the same ones. She opened the cabinet, looking past expensive imported teas before pulling out a plain box labeled Black Assam. Griffin smiled. "Didn't peg you for the bitter type," he said. "I'm not," she said, placing the kettle on the stove. "But sometimes sweetness is a lie. I prefer things that tell the truth." He nodded slowly. "Ta without sugar, words without armor." She looked at him, then fully looked, eyes scanning not for threat, but for story. "You speak like someone who's lost something." "I have," he said simply. The kettle hissed. She poured the water, handed him one of the mugs. "So what was it?" Griffin took a breath. "A woman, June. Smartest person I ever knew. Smarter than the doctors who told her she was overreacting. Smarter than the hospital that discharged her. With a bottle of Tylenol when her appendix was rotting inside her." Sloane flinched. "She died in our apartment on a Monday. I was holding her hand when she told me to keep Luca away from hospitals unless her arm was falling off." She was joking. His voice tightened, but she meant it. Silence bloomed between them. Sloane gripped her mug. "My father died in a hallway," she said. "St. Mary's. He had a heart attack and the insurance didn't cover his new meds. They delayed his refill by 2 days. 2. Griffin looked down at his tea. "I hate that we both know what that kind of grief tastes like. It tastes like metal and lawsuits," she whispered, "and people saying, 'I'm so sorry,' like it fixes anything." "Yeah," he chuckled bitterly. "Like apologies come with time machines." Their eyes met over the steam. For the first time since she hired him, Sloane didn't look like a CEO. She looked like someone who had built a fortress out of logic and success, and had no one left to show the inside to. Griffin didn't say anything clever. Instead, He reached into his coat pocket and placed something on the counter between them. A folded drawing. She raised an eyebrow. Lucas. He nodded. Sloane unfolded it gently. Crayon, stir strokes, bold, messy. Alive. It showed a tall figure in blue standing beside a golden door. The words at the top read, "My dad guards the light." Sloane's voice cracked. "She sees you like that." Griffin shrugged, eyes glassy. "She sees what she believes. I'm just trying not to break it." There was a pause, soft and sacred. "She's lucky," Sloane said, "to have a father who fights like that." Griffin didn't speak, but something in his chest shifted, like an old hinge creaking open. Then from down the hallway, the soft thump of feet, a tiny voice. "Mom! It was Ava!" Blurry-eyed, her bunny clutched under one arm. "I had the dream again," she said, voice trembling. Sloane was already kneeling. "Come here, baby." The little girl stumbled into her mother's arms. Sloane held her tightly but glanced up at Griffin, her composure threatening to crack. Griffin walked over and crouched beside them. "Hey, Ava," he said gently. "Want to tell me about the dream?" She looked at him hesitant, then nodded. The man with no face was trying to open the windows. I couldn't scream. Sloane's grip tightened. "She's had this one since the break-in." Griffin touched Ava's shoulder, his voice firm but soft. "Do you know what we do when the scary dreams come back?" Ava blinked. "We build a fortress in our head, one with lights and laughter and a lock that only you know." "But what if he finds the lock?" Ava whispered. Griffin reached into his pocket again, pulled out a silver key on a string doll scratched harmless. "He won't. Because this," he said, placing the key in her hand, "is your dream key. It only works for you. And if anyone tries to open your window, this key locks it tighter." Ava clutched it like treasure. "Will you stay until I fall asleep?" she asked. Sloane looked at Griffin. Something unspoken passed between them. "I'll be right outside your door," he said. As Ava padded back down the hall, Griffin stood. Sloane rose with him visibly shaken, but holding it together. "That key trick," she said. "Did you make that up, June?" "Did," he said quietly. "It worked for Luca when she had night terrors." Sloane took a shaky breath. "You keep fixing things no one even sees are broken." He gave her a look. Part smile, part wound. "We're not broken, Sloane, just bent in the same places." She stared at him, and for a moment it felt like the whole world slowed, like the room itself exhaled. Then the silence was broken by a kettle's forgotten whistle. Sloane moved first, turning off the stove, then turned back. "You should go home. It's late." "I will," Griffin said, "after I check the locks." As he walked past her, she spoke one more time. "Griffin." He stopped. "Thank you," she said, "not for what you did, but for staying soft in a world that tries to harden everyone." He looked back at her, eyes steady. "I'm not soft," he said. "I'm just not done fighting." And then he was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of black tea and the unspoken weight of everything they still didn't know how to say. The rain drummed steadily against the glass walls of Hartwell Biotech's executive tower, casting moving shadows across the quiet high-security server room 2 floors below. Griffin stood still among the blinking blue lights and hum of machines, his eyes locked on the monitor in front of him. Lines of code scrolled down in real time, too clean, too deliberate to be random. He wasn't supposed to be here. His ID badge didn't technically grant access past 1000 p.m., but he had found another way in quietly, respectfully, the way someone does when they're trying to protect rather than intrude. And right now, he was staring at something that made his gut twist. Encrypted packets rerouted through a ghost server, file names with subtle typos, and worse, he recognized the signature. Whoever was doing this knew the company's systems intimately. This wasn't an outsider. This was someone inside, someone close. He heard a soft knock from the hallway. "You know that room's badge locked for a reason," came a familiar voice. It was Bernie Sloan's old friend and head of cybersecurity, his tone teasing, but something in his eyes tightened when he saw Griffin's face. "What did you find?" Griffin didn't answer at first. He pointed to the screen. Bernie squinted, then stiffened. "That's a neural backup from the memory imprint module." Griffin's jaw flexed. "This was copied 3 nights ago. Accessed again last night. Off-site port." Bernie's voice dropped. "You're saying someone's been stealing medical memory files?" "I'm saying someone's been selling them," Griffin replied. "And it's not just patient memory backups. It's proprietary research, experimental treatments that haven't even cleared ethical review." Bernie looked like he'd been punched. "Who has this kind of clearance?" Griffin's voice was low, almost reluctant. "Level 5 access. Less than a dozen people." Bernie froze. They both knew who that included. The next morning, Griffin waited outside Sloan's office like a soldier ready to face court-martial. She glanced up from her desk as he entered, expression softening slightly when she saw it was him until she caught the look in his eyes. Her smile faded. "Close the door," she said. He did. Griffin stayed standing, arms crossed, not to be cold, but to hold himself together. "I found something last night," he said. "It's serious." Sloan gestured for him to sit, but he didn't move. Her gaze sharpened. "Go on, there's been a breach. Someone is copying neural treatment data and rerouting it to an external source." Her eyes didn't blink. "You're sure?" "Positive." Traced it back through the logs. A pause, then with a voice barely above a whisper. "Who?" Griffin hesitated. He wanted to say, "No one you'd expect." But that wasn't true. He finally said it. "Alana." Silence fell like a dropped glass. Sloan stared at him, eyes wide disbelief, crashing into her like a wave. "My assistant?" she asked, almost laughing. "She's been with me 8 years. She knows everything. She is everything. I know." "No, Griffin, listen to yourself. Alana held my hand the night my father died. She's the one who stayed after the funeral, who brought me food when I forgot to eat for days." "You think she—" "I don't think," he said quietly. "I saw the data." Sloan stood abruptly, backing away from the desk like the ground beneath her was cracking. "Do you have any idea what you're accusing her of? If this goes public, it could ruin everything we've built. Everything I've sacrificed to keep Hartwell ethical." Griffin's voice was steady, but his hands had curled into fists. "It's not an accusation. It's a fact. The system doesn't lie." Sloan turned away, shoulders trembling slightly. "I can't," she whispered. "Not now. Not without proof strong enough to survive the press aboard the vultures waiting for me to fall." Griffin stepped closer, his voice gentler now. "Then let me get it quietly. No alarms, just you, me, and the truth." She didn't speak, just nodded once her profile silhouetted against the morning light pouring through the tall windows. That night, Griffin sat outside in the courtyard, legs stretched back against the cold stone wall. The girls were asleep upstairs. Sloan hadn't spoken to him again after the meeting, not in words at least, but she had left him a cup of tea on the table. No sugar, just the way he took it. He stared at the sky-chipped moon-silent stars and felt the weight of secrets pressing on his chest like armor he thought he'd taken off long ago. He didn't hear the footsteps until they stopped beside him. "You were right," came her voice, soft and resigned. He looked up. Sloan stood barefoot in the grass, arms wrapped around herself. "I checked the backups, the logs, everything." "You said matches." Griffin didn't gloat, didn't move. She encrypted it herself. Sloan continued. "She used my schedule to time it. She knew when I'd be out of range, when no one would suspect." He looked at her. "You okay?" "No," she said. "But I will be." She sat down next to him, knees brushing his. "After A long silence. She asked, "Why didn't you tell me everything before when you first noticed the breach?" "I didn't want to bring you another burden," he said. "Not until I knew for sure." She gave a sad laugh. "You ever notice how pain has a way of bringing the right people together at the wrong time?" He looked at her, really looked, and in that moment, she wasn't the CEO of a billion-dollar biotech company. She was just a woman, tired, hurt, brave, and sometimes, he said, it's the wrong people who end up doing the right thing. Sloane turned to him. "You're not the wrong person, Griffin." He didn't answer, just reached over and gently brushed a leaf from her hair. Neither of them said anything after that, but they didn't have to. No longer a mission. Now it was family. The shriek of tires tore through the early morning calm like a scream across glass. Sloane dropped her coffee porcelain shattering across the sidewalk as she sprinted across the parking lot toward the small figure frozen in place. The driver, too fast, too close, swerved just in time, the car clipping a stop sign with a screech that echoed off the school's brick walls. Her daughter, Ava, stood motionless in the crosswalk, her lunchbox on the ground, her face pale. Sloane wrapped her arms around her heart pounding. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" Ava shook her head, lips trembling. He didn't even try to stop. But Sloane had seen his eyes through the windshield wide open, locked on Ava, and filled with something that looked a little too deliberate to be panic. She called Griffin. Griffin arrived 5 minutes later. When he saw the shattered coffee cup, the scorched rubber marks, and Ava clinging to her mother's coat, he didn't speak. He turned and walked back to his car. 15 minutes later, the heavy oak door to Sloane's office exploded open. Griffin stood in the frame like a storm-made flesh, soaked from the sudden downpour, chest-heaving voice, shaking not from fear, but from something deeper. "This ends now," he growled. Sloane stood from her desk. "What happened?" He threw a thumb drive onto her table. "That wasn't an accident. Someone used Ava to send a message." Sloane's face turned to stone. "Are you sure I know what a warning shot looks like? I've sent enough of them in another life." Her voice was still now. "What do you need?" He didn't flinch. "Everything. Access, clearance, and your trust." Sloane stepped around her desk, looked him straight in the eye, and said quietly, "Then you have it. All of it." She handed him a key card. "Level 6, my clearance." He took it without a word, but she caught his wrist as he turned to leave. "Griffin, bring them down hard." He nodded once. "I will." That afternoon, Griffin sat in the back seat of his car outside Westbrook Prep, watching the children flood, out in clusters of laughter and backpacks. Luca spotted him first. Her eyes lit up as she ran to the car, slamming the door behind her. "Hey, you picked me up today." From the other side, Ava climbed in quiet, but safe. She glanced at Lena and gave a small smile. "Hi," Griffin pulled away from the curb, voice calm. "We're going on a little adventure just for a few days." The girls didn't question it. Maybe they didn't need to. Maybe kids more than adults sensed when a storm was coming. The safe house sat nestled near the edge of Lake Forest, surrounded by evergreens and silence. No cell reception, no internet, just a firewood heater, a stocked pantry, and a sense of safety stitched into every wall. Griffin tucked both girls into the pull-out bed in the loft. No schoolwork, just stories and marshmallows. Lena grinned sleepily. "Dad, are we hiding Griffin-brushed hair from her forehead?" "We're pausing." "There's a difference." Ava clutched her stuffed penguin and whispered, "Will my mom be okay?" Griffin hesitated, then knelt between them. "Your mom," he said, "is the bravest woman I've ever met. She's not just okay. She's fighting for all of us." Ava nodded solemnly, and Griffin stayed by their side until their breathing slowed into dreams. By midnight, he was back at Hartwell alone. He walked through the main lobby, His janitor's uniform soaked again from rain. The security guards didn't stop him. He still had his usual route logged, but this time the mop bucket held more than cleaning supplies. It held truth, evidence, rage, and a plan. He paused by the mirror in the empty executive elevator. For a long moment, he stared at himself. The janitor, the father, the former agent who had buried too much of his past for far too long. "No more ghosts," he muttered. The doors slid open, and he disappeared into the shadows of the upper floors. That same hour, Sloane sat alone in her home office, scrolling through confidential board communications. One email caught her eye, time-stamped, exactly 5 minutes before Ava's near accident, sent from Alana's personal account. The subject line read, "A weak spot." Inside was a single line of text, "Even steel cracks when you strike where it bends." Sloane felt her stomach turn. She reached for her phone and typed one line to Griffin. "You were right." A second later, the 3 dots appeared. "And then I know I'm already inside." The hunt had begun. The sun hadn't yet risen over the Hartwell Biotech campus, but inside its walls. The air was already pulsing with anticipation, though no one could say exactly why. The word had spread quietly. A Level 6 internal security review. Mandatory attendance for all executive-level personnel. Sealed agenda. No digital invites. No remote access. Just one phrase passed down like a whisper through the ranks conference. Room Alpha. 7 p.m. tonight. Sloane signed the memo with her own hand. But the true author of this meeting was a man who now stood alone in the company's darkened server corridor, examining the wiring behind a ceiling panel. Griffin's hands moved with precision, silent, surgical. Every motion was purposeful. Every corner of the building mapped, calculated, and rewired with intent. This wasn't paranoia. It was war. He'd seen what happened when you confronted a snake. In the open, they bite. But in a controlled space with nowhere to slither, snakes show their true shape. By midday, the trap was set. Infrared sensors lined every hallway surrounding conference room Alpha, calibrated not to detect movement, but intent. Pulse spikes, sudden temperature shifts, biometrics patterns only someone like Griffin could have configured. Micro cameras embedded. Behind sprinkler heads fed a direct stream to an off-site drive, encrypted and cloud-synced. Every door was rigged for fail-safe lockdown. The escape routes, false exits, remote triggered, and the lighting dimmed just enough to fray nerves, but bright enough for every face to be seen. This wasn't a room anymore, it was a stage. At 6:52 p.m., Griffin stood in the corner of the nearly empty room, dressed in a black maintenance uniform, unmarked, unbothered, invisible by design. He watched each executive enter, some tense, others curious, a few, visibly annoyed, and then Alana. She stepped inside like she always had, graceful, poised, unshakably professional. Her tablet hugged close to her chest. Her eyes scanned the room but didn't linger until they did. Right on him, their gazes locked. Just a second, but it was enough. She knew. He gave no reaction, just turned away and exited through a side corridor, tapping twice on his earpiece. Phase 2. They're in. Exactly at 7:00 p.m., the door shut with a subtle hiss, soundproofed, magnetically sealed. The screens flickered on with Sloane's face live from the operations center. "Thank you all for coming," she said, voice even. "What's about to be discussed must remain in this room." Some execs shifted in their seats. Alana remained still. Behind the mirrored glass of an adjacent surveillance room, Griffin watched every heartbeat rise by a fraction, and then the power flickered. Not a blackout, just a warning. Footsteps echoed down the western corridor, unscheduled, unbadged, unauthorized. "They're here," Griffin whispered. From the west entrance, 5 men in unmarked gear moved swiftly down the hallway. Their movements were precise shoulders, tight eyes, scanning weapons holstered but visible beneath their jackets. Corporate mercenaries, not cops, not amateurs. And all of them were following Alana's private access route, the one she thought only she knew existed. They reached the secured door to the conference room. The lock disengaged, but only for one of them, just one. The rest trapped. Steel barriers slammed down behind them. Lights snapped to full brightness. Sirens stayed off, but the silence was louder than any alarm. Inside the conference room, Sloane's voice dropped an octave. "I want to thank each of you," she said, "for your loyalty, for your silence, and especially for showing up." Alana stood too slowly, too deliberately. Then she turned toward the door. Griffin stepped into the room just as it opened. He faced her, only her. "This is the part," he said softly, "where you stop running." Alana looked at him, her expression caught between defiance and resignation. "You don't understand." "No," he cut in, calm but sharp. "I do understand. You built the back doors, sold memory backups like trading cards, and then you brought in muscle to wipe the trail." Her jaw tightened. "I did what I had to. Hartwell has been corrupt for years." "Then burn the system," Griffin replied. "But don't. Sell people's souls to do it." Behind him, two plainclothes federal agents entered. Griffin stepped aside. "You're under arrest," one said as he clicked the cuffs around her wrists. No shouting, no violence, just the clean mechanical sound of metal, meeting truth. Outside the building, the rain had started again, gentle this time, like the sky had finally exhaled. Griffin stood in the plaza under the glass awning, watching as Alana was led into the black car, her silhouette small now, powerless. Sloane joined him. "She said she did it for justice," Sloane murmured. "She did it for revenge," he said. "Justice doesn't sneak through vents." They stood in silence for a while. Then Sloane asked, "What now?" Griffin looked at the horizon. "Now," he said quietly, "we rebuild clean. Tell the truth and pray that the people we hurt are still willing to forgive us." She nodded slowly, then glanced sideways. "You were never just a janitor, were you?" Griffin gave the ghost of a smile. "No, but you still clean better than anyone I've ever met." He turned toward her fully now, eyes tired but clear. "I just care more about what's worth saving." And with that, they stepped back inside together. The cameras were already rolling when Sloane Hart stepped up to the podium. Outside Hartwell Biotech's towering headquarters, 100 reporters pressed. Forward under a late autumn sky, the wind tugging at umbrellas and lapel mics alike. The glass facade of the building reflected a woman who no longer fit the title she'd worn for a decade. She wasn't CEO anymore, but she had never stood taller. Sloane adjusted the mic. Her voice didn't tremble, not even once. "I've been advised not to speak today," she began. "My attorneys told me to remain silent. Let the investigation conclude, protect my future. But some things matter more than self-preservation." She paused, took a breath. "I am resigning, effective immediately." Gasps swept through the crowd. She continued, "Not because I'm guilty of any wrongdoing, but because leadership requires more than innocence. It requires responsibility and humility." She looked down for a moment, then back up. "There were signs I missed. People I trusted who abused that trust. And people I didn't listen to soon enough." Her voice dropped slightly steadier still. "But today, I make one choice very clear. We didn't choose what was easy. We chose what was right." And then came the line no one forgot. "We can't rewrite the past, but we can stop being afraid of telling the truth." The crowd went silent. Then came the applause, not loud at first, but honest, respectful, earned. Sloane stepped away from the podium and didn't look back. She didn't need to. Griffin wasn't at the press conference. He was in a different kind of room, one without glass walls or high ceilings, just padded mats, soft lighting, and the echo of young voices calling out counting drills in unison. 4:56. The community center gym wasn't fancy, but it was full of purpose. Griffin stood barefoot on the mat, demonstrating a simple defensive move for a line of 6 girls, none older than 10. Every one of them focused, every one of them learning. That strength didn't have to look loud. Luca sat near the back, wiping sweat from her brow with a grin. Next to her was Sloane's daughter, Ava, face flushed from effort, but eyes shining with something new. Confidence, courage. "Okay," Griffin said, smiling again, this time with intention. "If someone grabs your wrist, what do? Anchor, twist, step back." The girls' chorus. He nodded. "That's right. But remember, this isn't about hurting someone. It's about knowing you don't have to be afraid anymore." The class clapped after the final round. As the kids ran for their water bottles, Griffin leaned against the wall, sweat soaking into his t-shirt. He looked around the room, watching laughter replace tension, watching healing happen in real time. This was his new life. No badge, no title, no paycheck. But for the first time in years, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. It was just after 8 p.m. when the lights in the gym dimmed to low. Most of the children had left with their parents. Luca and Ava were stacking foam pads near the exit, giggling about something that involved a water balloon and a cookie. Griffin knelt by his duff and tying the laces on his shoes. He didn't hear the door open, but he felt her presence before. He turned. Sloane stood in the doorway, dressed in jeans and a gray sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. No heels, no boardroom armor, just a woman, tired, human, and finally unburdened. He rose to his feet slowly. She crossed the room without a word, her eyes not leaving his, and then, with no pretense, no ceremony, she reached out and took his hand. It was quiet. The gym smelled faintly of rubber and lavender cleaning spray. The kids' laughter still echoed, faintly from the hallway, but in that moment, it all faded away. Sloane's fingers curled around his gently like someone learning how to touch again. Griffin didn't speak. Neither did she, because sometimes words only get in the way of truth. After a long moment, she whispered, "You made them feel safe." He looked, down at her voice low. "So did you." "I don't know what comes next," she admitted. Griffin squeezed her hand, just slightly. "That's okay." They stood like that for a while. Two people who had been torn apart by duty lies and grief, finally letting themselves be. Not CEO and protector, not hero and survivor. Just them whole. Later that night, Sloane sat beside him on the back steps of the center, a blanket wrapped around their shoulders. The stars were faint behind the city haze, but one or two still burned through. "You ever wonder," she asked softly, "if some people come into your life to teach you how to stay when everything else tells you to run?" Griffin looked at her. "I think he said some people come into your life to teach you how to heal." She leaned her head on his shoulder. No contracts, no press releases, just the sound of a children's laughter still echoing through a hallway they had filled with strength. And for the first time in a very long time, the future didn't feel so uncertain anymore. A full year had passed. The old apartment still had the same creaky floors, the same stubborn kitchen cabinet that stuck on humid mornings, and the same scuff mark near the hallway where Griffin had once knocked over a lamp while rushing to grab a crying Luca. But the silence was gone. Now it breathed. There were giggles echoing from the living room, the smell of burnt waffles from a too eager 8-year-old's attempt at breakfast, and a line of little shoes by the front door that no longer belonged to just one boy. Griffin stood, at the stove spatula in hand, wearing an apron that said, "Yes, chef." No clue. Luca had picked it out as a joke. He wore it proudly. Behind him. Sloane was trying to braid Ava's hair while dodging toast crumbs flying from Luca's enthusiastic storytelling about a field trip to the planetarium. So the black hole just sucks time, he explained, arms flailing like a magician, and I told Mr. Jennings that if I threw my math homework into one, he couldn't penalize me for it being late. Griffin raised an eyebrow. Creative? Did it work? No, but he said I should consider theoretical physics. From the couch, Ava giggled. Or comedy. Luca threw a pillow at her. She dodged. Hey, Sloane warned, still wrangling the braid. Truce, at least until breakfast. The place was chaos. Warm, beautiful chaos. It wasn't a house from a magazine. The windows still needed new blinds. The dishwasher was on its last leg, and Griffin's old toolbox lived permanently under the sink. But it had become something he never thought he'd have again, a home. Sloane poured herself coffee and joined Griffin at the counter. She watched him flip a pancake with the quiet confidence of someone who had fought wars larger than batter and burners. He looked over at her with that half-smile that never asked for anything, but always gave everything. I keep waiting for someone to knock on the door and tell me this isn't ours, she murmured. Griffin glanced toward the living room where Ava was now painting Luca's nails in alternating blue and silver. They'd have to go through them first. She laughed, then softened. You rebuilt something I thought I'd lost forever, Griff. Not just this place, me. He paused, letting that land. Then you brought the light. I just fixed the leaky pipes. Sloane leaned in, brushing a kiss against his cheek. You always underell your magic? From the hallway came the sound of the front door unlocking. Oh, no, Sloane said, straightening. It's Sunday. The door swung open. A voice called out, I brought muffins and unsolicited opinions. Bernie. He breathed in like a gust of overconfident weather-pressed blazer beard perfectly trimmed and a paper bag from his favorite bakery tucked under one arm. Ava's face lit up. Uncle Bernie. He handed her the bag. Blueberry lemon. If your dad doesn't eat them first. Sloane blinked. He's not. Bernie held up a hand. Semantics. I've seen him make grilled cheese with heart-shaped cutouts. That man is more committed than half the people I know with vows and joint bank accounts. Griffin smirked. Flattery gets you a cup of burnt coffee. I brought my own, Bernie said, pulling a thermos from his satchel. Because I know you. He settled onto the armchair like it had always belonged to him. In truth, it kinda did. Bernie had become the accidental uncle, the backup school pickup guy, the master of awkward board games and holiday trivia nights. I was supposed to be rich, charming, and emotionally unavailable, Bernie lamented dramatically. Now I own a fourth. Grade science project, Luca yelled from the hallway. That volcano exploded because of you. Uncle B, I prefer erupted due to strategic chaos. Thank you very much. Griffin and Sloane exchanged glances. Life had become strange in the best way. That evening, after the dishes were stacked and the cartoons faded to background noise, Griffin sat on the floor with Ava, helping her build a model of the solar system for school. She handed him Saturn's rings made from glitter and cardboard. You think Saturn feels lonely? She asked suddenly. Griffin looked at her, pausing mid-glue. Why do you ask? Because it's surrounded. But not touched, he swallowed. That's a smart question. I think sometimes people feel like that too. But just because you're different doesn't mean you're alone. She nodded, thought for a second, then casually, as if she'd been saying it forever. Thanks, Dad. Griffin froze. She didn't look up. She just kept painting Jupiter. He didn't say anything at first because there are some moments so sacred, so unforced that speaking feels like dropping a stone into still water. Eventually, he said softly, You don't have to call me that. I know, she replied. That's why I did. Sloane, standing quietly in the doorway with a mug in hand, turned away so they wouldn't see the tears in her eyes. They weren't perfect. No framed certificate declared them a family. There were no shared surnames, no blood ties between all of them, but the walls held laughter. The fridge held drawings and crooked magnets. The night held peace, and sometimes that's what family is. Not the one you're born into, but the one brave enough to choose you anyway. The gymnasium smelled faintly of old varnish popcorn and crayons. Rows of folding chairs creaked under the shuffle of parents, teachers, and restless children waiting for the start of the annual Parent and Guardian Appreciation Night. Sloane had sat through hundreds of corporate board meetings in glass towers, but nothing ever made her palms sweat quite like this. She glanced at the stage where a crooked banner read, "Thank you for helping us grow," in glitter-glued letters. Beside her, Griffin leaned back, one arm casually draped over the chair behind her. He wore a dark green button-D down, the sleeves rolled up, always rolled up. His forearms still bore faint scars from old burn-scrapes life. She had long stopped seeing them as flaws. Now they were her favorite part of him. On the other side of the gym, Luca was waving wildly from his class row. Next to her, Ava sat up straight, her hair braided in two neat lines, a silver clip on each side. She looked proud, confident, like a girl who had once whispered in fear, now bold enough to raise her hand first. The room bustled with noise teachers, herding kids like sheep parents murmuring about math scores and drama club sign-ups. Then it happened. Sloane turned her head just in time to catch a simple moment. Griffin had quietly knelt down beside the bench where the kids were sitting. Ava had tugged on her shoelace. It had come undone. Without a word, Griffin crouched, tied it carefully, double loop. Then he noticed Lucas' laces too frayed and tangled, and without skipping a beat, he fixed those as well. He wasn't trying to be seen, he didn't even know he was seen. But Sloane saw it, and in that second, the dam inside her, when she hadn't even known she'd built, finally broke. Tears welled without warning. She brought a hand to her lips, trying to breathe through the ache that wasn't pain at all, but release. Not because of sorrow, not because of guilt, but because she'd finally stepped past them, past the headlines, the mistakes, the pressure, the long-held fear that she'd never be enough for her daughter, for herself. And in front of her, tying shoes. With the same gentle care he'd once used to dress wounds and clean, bloodied hallways, was the man who had shown her what enough actually looked like. It looked like kindness without audience. It looked like strength without ego. It looked like Griffin Ward. That night, after the kids had fallen asleep, Ava tucked under her constellation blanket. Luca sprawled across his twin bed like he'd wrestled the moon. Sloane wandered into the living room in her robe and bare feet. The hallway was lit only by the soft golden glow of the nightlight shaped like a rocket ship. She paused in front of the entry wall. The photo was newly framed. She hadn't seen Griffin hang it. He probably didn't want to make a thing of it, but there it was, a candid picture someone must have snapped from the edge of that chaotic fundraiser weeks ago. Griffin, laughing mid-sentence, holding a broken broom like a trophy over one shoulder. His face caught mid-joy, eyes crinkled a smudge of dust on his cheek. Beneath the photo, engraved in clean serif font, were the words, "These hands were never just for cleaning. They were always for protecting." She touched the frame, her fingers tracing the edge. So many people had passed him by, brushed past the man in the uniform, never bothering to see the fire inside. But these hands, these honest hands, had carried her daughter out of fear, had held her own trembling body when she thought she'd collapse, had fixed what power and money never could. They had built this home. Behind her, Griffin stepped into the hallway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He wore a faded t-shirt and pajama pants. Still looked like someone who could drop a man twice his size without flinching, but also like someone who now read bedtime stories about dragons and friendship bracelets. He noticed her looking at the photo. "Too much?" he asked softly. "No," she whispered. "Not enough." She crossed the few steps between them and wrapped her arms around his waist. He rested his chin on her hair. "I used to think recognition mattered," she said. "The titles, the wins, the being right. But now," he waited. "I just want to be the kind of woman you'd tie shoes for." Griffin smiled against her temple. "You already are." In the quiet that followed, they stood like that for a long while. No phones, no headlines, no deals, just two people who had nearly missed each other in the noise of the world and finally learned how to listen. A creak from one of the bedrooms made them pull apart slightly, then a soft voice. Mom Ava stood in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "I had a weird dream. Can I sleep with you?" Griffin scooped her up gently. "Of course you can, kiddo." She curled against his chest, tiny hands clutching his shirt. As he turned to carry her back, she murmured, half asleep, "Good night, Dad." He stopped just for a second. Sloane met his eyes. He didn't cry, but something deeper than tears passed between them. An unspoken thank you. Not just for loving her, but for letting her choose when. And as the door clicked softly behind them, Sloane leaned back against the wall under the framed photo. She looked up at the man she loved, captured in laughter, holding a broken broom like a sword. Not a savior, not a hero, just a man with honest hands. And she knew that would always be enough. And maybe that's the real story here. That the greatest strength isn't found in power, but in kindness. Not in titles or money, but in the quiet hands that choose to protect even when no one's watching. Because sometimes heroes don't wear badges. They carry mops, or they hold a child's hand, or they stay when everyone else walks away. Now it's your turn. Where in the world are you watching from? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Did this story touch something in you? Drop a comment below. We read every word. And if this story moved you, hit that subscribe button so you won't miss the next journey. More heartwarming tales of quiet strength, of second chances, and the families we choose are waiting just around the corner. Thank you for spending this moment with us. We're grateful you're